Ever get that feeling, like, are we really all working with the same instructions here? It can feel like everyone else just gets it, whatever it is. Today, we're talking about a situation where those instructions can be even more confusing. Being autistic within a really structured religious group, specifically Jehovah's Witnesses.
And this isn't just some theoretical thing. We're diving into a really interesting article that looks at how discipline within that faith impacts people on the spectrum.
And to be clear, this isn't about judging anyone's beliefs or saying one religion's right or wrong. Not at all.
Yeah, this is about the people.
Exactly. Families trying to make sense of it all, honoring their faith, but also supporting loved ones who experience the world differently. It's complex.
And the article gets that. Like, it lays out how certain things that are just core to being a Jehovah's Witness.
Like what?
Well, like their view of the Bible, super strict interpretation, right? And the emphasis on moral conduct, like really strong expectations there.
Right, got it.
Those things can make it extra tough when you're talking about autism, which often means seeing the world differently, literally.
And that's even before we bring in terms like, remind me again, reproof.
Reproof and disfellowshipping.
Right, those two. I always mix them up, but they're super important in this context.
Absolutely. So reproof, think of it like a formal way to correct someone within the faith.
To keep everyone on the same page, morally speaking.
Yeah, meant to guide them back to what they consider righteous behavior. Usually done privately, but still can be a pretty intense experience.
Yeah.
Then you've got disfellowshipping. That's the heavy hitter.
That's the one where they're
Basically shunned by the community. No contact, not just with friends, but family too. Like even your own family, if they're still part of the congregation, they're told to cut you off.
Wow. Okay, so imagine this, someone on the spectrum, right? And they maybe struggle with eye contact, super common, right?
Very common.
But in this community, that could be seen as
Disrespectful. Dishonest even. The article talks about this, how something that's just neurological, just how you are, gets taken as a moral failing.
And that's when the reproof, even disfellowshipping, comes in.
Exactly. You're isolating someone who might already have a hard time connecting, making that even worse.
It's like being punished for yourself.
And it goes deeper. The expectation in this faith is to be really open with elders about struggles, even like potential sins, right? Now, for anyone, that's tough. But for someone on the spectrum who might not get social cues the same way or have trouble putting their feelings into words.
Oh, man, I can only imagine how stressful that would be.
Yeah, it can be really, really difficult for them.
And what about families where, say, a parent's a pioneer? I know that term, but...
So pioneers, they're super dedicated to spreading their faith.
Right, lots of hours put in.
Big time commitment. Now, layer that on top of raising a child with autism who might need different things, might not do well in those typical ministry settings.
That's a lot.
To say the least. And that's where the article really digs into the strain it puts on everyone.
On the individual, but also the whole family unit, right?
Yeah, the article talks about this feeling like being pulled in two directions at once, wanting to honor your faith, but also knowing your child needs you to fight for them, even if it means going against the grain. Tough spot.
And it makes you wonder how that affects everyone in the family, not just the parents, but siblings too, right?
Oh, for sure. Strained relationships, resentment, this kind of underlying sadness that the article says can affect the whole family unit. And if you're a pioneer family, with those extra ministry hours on top of it all.
Right, we were just talking about how demanding that is.
It's a recipe for burnout, basically. The article was pretty clear about that higher risk of conflict in those families, just from the sheer pressure.
Man, it really makes you think, like we need more understanding, more support, and not just within this one religion, right? Anytime we're talking about faith and neurodiversity, it seems like there's this extra layer of complexity.
Absolutely. And the article did point to some potential solutions, things that could help. What really stood out to me was the emphasis on education.
Like, not just autism awareness generally, but...
More specific, training people within the Jehovah's Witness community, having elders, really everyone, understand what autism is, but also, like, how to talk to someone on the spectrum in a way that makes sense for both people.
More compassionate communication.
Right, exactly. And giving those families a network, people who get it, who can share resources, advice, that kind of thing. The article really emphasized how important that is.
Makes sense, especially with all this potential for isolation that we're talking about. And did they talk about the ministry itself? Like, could that be adapted at all to be more inclusive?
Yeah, they brought up flexibility, especially for pioneer families. Like, could those hour requirements be adjusted? Maybe there are other ways to contribute that would be a better fit for someone with autism, you know?
So they can participate, but in a way that plays to their strengths.
Yes. Because it shouldn't be about forcing someone into a box, right? It should be about recognizing, hey, everyone has something to offer, even if it looks different.
It's like the article was saying, we have to check our assumptions at the door. Just because someone acts or communicates differently doesn't mean they're not devout or that they don't have a deep connection to their faith.
Totally. And that really resonated with me. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is be willing to question what we think we know and just make space.
For people to be themselves fully, this has been a lot, honestly. Definitely giving me a lot to think about.
Me too. And for anyone listening who wants to go deeper on this, we'll link the full article on our site. It's worth checking out.
Definitely. And as we wrap up, here's something to chew on. We talk about accepting neurodiversity, which is a start, right? But how do we move past just accepting to genuinely celebrating the unique strengths and perspectives it brings? That's the challenge, I think.
That's a good one. It's almost like there's this pressure, you know, like families are supposed to be able to, I don't know, fix their autistic loved ones, make them fit in, when that's often just not realistic.
And that can be so damaging, right? Because underneath it all, you know, these families love their kids. They want to honor their faith. It's just complicated.
Yeah, and the article touched on that. Like, we need to be able to talk about this stuff more openly within the community itself. Because when it's all hush-hush, when there's no space to say, hey, this is hard, that just makes the shame and the isolation even worse.
Totally. And I'm thinking about the kids and all this, you know, growing up feeling like they're always falling short, never quite good enough.
That's what worries me too. Because if we're not careful, we end up pushing people into this corner where it's like they have to pick between their faith and who they are.
When it really shouldn't be a choice, right?
Exactly. It should be about finding ways for both of those things to not just coexist, but actually like make each other stronger.
It's a good reminder for all of us, you know, whatever we believe, wherever we come from, how can we get better at creating spaces where people don't just tolerate difference, but actually value it?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It really comes down to recognizing that everyone has something unique to offer, and that's something to be celebrated.
This conversation has been honestly kind of eye-opening for me. Definitely a lot to think about. For our listeners, we'll put a link to that full article on our website so you can check it out yourselves.
Definitely worth a read. A lot to unpack there.
And before we go, here's a final thought, maybe something to keep in mind as you explore this topic further. We've made progress with accepting neurodiversity, right? But how do we move past just accepting to really celebrating those unique strengths and perspectives? That's the next step, and I think it's a conversation worth having.
Big time.
It is. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep asking those tough questions. And until next time, take care.